Welcome back to the wonderful world of knitting. Last time you learned how to do the basic knit stitch, and you learned how to cast on your stitches so you'd have something to knit. Well, when you do row after row after row of the knit stitch, you've created something called the garter stitch. And it has a particular look, which might be very nice for certain projects, but may not be what you want all the time. So today I'm going to show you how to do a different kind of stitch that, combined with what you already know, will create a beautiful pattern that most people, when they talk about knitting, this is the look that they have in mind. And it's called stockinette, where you knit one row and you purl the other. You've heard the phrase knit one, purl two. Well, that's where that came from. So today I'm going to teach you how to do the purl stitch. And here is the purl stitch. How do we create this very pretty stitch? When we do a row of the knit stitch, but when we turn the yarn over and we do the purl stitch, look at how different the reverse side looks. Isn't that interesting? It's all tight horizontal loops. Let me show you that again. This side is the stockinette stitch, and traditionally this is called the right side, and this side would be called the wrong side, because when you're making something, a sweater or, oh my goodness, almost anything, a scarf, this is the side that it's understood that that's what you want people to be able to see. In fact, the sweater I'm working on right now uses this stitch. So I do a row of knit stitch, I turn it over, and I do a row of purl. But how do we do that? Well, that's what I'll show you next. You know the steps of the knit stitch. Now let's adapt those steps and learn to purl. So let's review what you learned last time. We're getting the yarn on the needle. Start with a slip knot. Then we're going to be casting on all of those stitches. Do you remember how to do it? Right needle in from the front, yarn behind then between, capture the loop, return the loop to the left needle, and there you go. We're going to use the skills that you learned in your last episode, and now we're going to add another kind of stitch and make that beautiful stockinette pattern. So first we have to get the yarn on the needle. So we will make a slip knot, we'll tighten it, we'll put the left needle inside the loop, tighten the loop, we will, right needle goes in from the front, yarn goes behind in between, we capture the loop and we put it back on the needle. In from the front, yarn goes behind then between, we capture the loop and put it on the needle. Again, yarn goes behind in between, loop on, we'll do one more. In from the front, yarn behind then between, capture the loop, and we're putting that loop back on, and now we are ready with 10 stitches, and I'm going to do the knit stitch across. So you know, want me to say it? Okay, I will say the pattern. In from the front, yarn behind then between, capture the loop, slide it off. In from the front, yarn behind in between, capture the loop, slide it off. Bet you can do it faster now too. And we'll do a couple more. We'll be through with that whole first row, and then fun will begin with the purl stitch. So here's that first row. Get ready, we're about to purl. Now the purl stitch uses almost everything you already know about the knit stitch, except that we do it kind of backwards. It's not as difficult as I just made it sound. Here's the very first thing you need to know. The yarn is now going to be following along in front of your knitting. Remember when you were doing the plain knit stitch, the yarn was always behind, and then we would bring it up in between. Well, the yarn's going to be in front. So here is step 1. First, the right needle goes in from the back. The right needle goes in from the back. See what I just did? Remember with the garter knit stitch, in from the front, but we're going to do the opposite. Needle comes in from the back. One more time. The right needle comes in from the back. Next, the yarn goes from the front, then in between. Now step 2, your yarn is going to go in between from the right. Let me show you that again. Here's your yarn. It's going to go in between. One more time. And you can think of it as from the front, in between. Okay, capture the loop. Now you're going to capture the loop. Watch how I do that. Can you see that? Let me do that again. So our yarn has gone in between. There's a loop there now. Let's zoom in on that. And this loop is going to get captured by this tip and come out on the right needle back there. And now we're going to slide it off. Sounds familiar, huh? And last of all, we slide it off, so you know it all. Here are the 4 steps to the purl stitch. First, in from the back. Yarn in between, capture the loop, and of course, slide it off. In from the back. Yarn in between, capture the loop, slide it off. In from the back, yarn goes in between, capture that loop, slide it off the left needle. In from the back, yarn in between, capture the loop, slide it off. I'll do a few more and you'll see that we are doing kind of the opposite of what you do on the knit stitch. One more, needle comes from behind, from the back, yarn goes in between, capture the loop, and we slide it off. And you've now done a row, and when I turn it over and we zoom in, you can begin to see how pretty that stockinette pattern looks. So that's what the purl stitch looks like. And this is what stockinette looks like. So now you know the purl stitch, and with the purl stitch you can make that pretty stockinette, and that's it. So in Knit with Susie 101 you learned how to cast on and you learned to do the knit stitch In this video, you learned the purl stitch. So now you can create 2 different knitting stitches. The garter stitch, where you knit each row, and stockinette stitch, where you alternate rows of knit and purl. Bravo! And in Knit with Susie 103, you'll learn to bind off, and that's where you take all the stitches off the needles. See you next time. And if you have any questions, contact me at knitwithsusie@gmail.com. And until next time, bye for now.